Good morning, class. We're going to make a video today on percents. We'll try to keep it nice and short for you. Quick review though, when dealing with percents, we need to remember how to represent things out of 100 because percents means parts per 100. So if we were going to try to model a decimal of 1.63, one way to do that would be use base 10 or base 100 blocks. So if we have this 10 by 10 grid which represents 100 little pieces, that could now represent our whole unit. So that could be one whole, and here are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 more of those smallest 100th size blocks, right? And then we'd have 3 more. Okay, so you remember modeling stuff like this in elementary school, no doubt. Here's another one real quick. 3800ths would be, again, that's 3/10. 3 in the tens place represents those 30 hundredths, and then 8 more hundredths. That would be 3800ths, 0 and 3800ths. And so we could represent fractions this way, we can represent decimals this way, and now today we're really just going to talk about percents this way. This 3800ths is actually 38%, or 38 of 100. And so what that looks like, here you have this sheet shared with you in Google Classroom as well. Percentages are ratios representing parts per 100. Similar to unit rates and proportions, percentages can be very useful in making comparisons and predictions. Fractions can just be converted to percentages by scaling the denominator up or down, so the denominator is 100. Basically all we're doing there is making equivalent fractions. Okay? And then decimals can also be converted to percentages by multiplying by 100. They're already in hundredths. If we think about how we read decimals out loud, we can read it to the hundredths place, and we basically have our percentage. So what I'm looking at here in this first example, this one was already done for us here, but the fraction I'll just show you here, this is 7/10. If they gave us 0.7, it would be 7/10, right? Which we could also make into hundredths. 7/10 is the same as 70 hundredths. Or think of it this decimal way here, we can always just add a 0 here, and that hasn't changed the value at all. So we created an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, or we've just read it to the hundredths place. 7/10 is really the same thing as 70 hundredths, and that makes 70%, because remember, a percent is out of 100. So we're just thinking of that parts per 100. It's like a unit rate where we have a 1 as a denominator to make our comparison. Now we're just trying to make everything have 100 as our denominator to make the comparison. This one already had the hundredths place, right? 3 out of 100. So 3 hundredths is 3%. And as you can see, when you model it as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent, it's always going to look the same. This is 7/10, 7 groups of 10, or 70 out of the 100, 70 out of the 100, 70 out of the 100. Okay? Same thing here. This was just 3 out of the 100. 3 hundredths, 3 hundredths. And if you forgot how to make some of these conversions, we're just going to go through these 4 here to wrap up this video. Well, I'm going to start here with 1/8. A lot of times if you can just read the fraction out loud, you can make the decimal, right? Like up here it was 3 100ths, so 3 hundredths. Okay, but now down here, this doesn't have an easy conversion to get a 100 or a 10 as my base to make it a fraction I can easily say as a decimal. So all I'm going to do is divide that out. I'm going to do 1 divided by 8. Remember, every fraction is a division problem in disguise, and if I type that into my calculator, 1 divided by 8, I end up with the answer of 0.125. And then to make that a decimal, I think, well, what is in the hundredths place here? There's 12 100ths. There's actually 12.5 100ths if I think about it that way. And I mentioned before, we can just multiply it by 100. So if I multiplied this by 100, that would slide the decimal 2 to the right, and that would make this 12.5%. So another way to think about this again is 0.125 or 125 thousandths is really 12.5 100ths, so 12.5%. Now when they have a fraction of a percent, or it's a percent greater than 100%, those get a little tricky, but don't let that first example scare you away here. This is pretty simple stuff. If we think about this number, 35 hundredths, how would I write that as a fraction? Well, I just read it by place value. I didn't read it as 3/5. I read it out loud as 0 and 35 hundredths. Well, I know how to write that as a fraction. 35 100ths. Okay, and that's, again, the percent is out of 100, so how many out of 100 is it? It's 35. 35%, right? So 35 over 100 is the same as 0.35 or 35 hundredths, 35%. Now, usually what we want to do is also simplify this fraction into its simplest form. So I could just divide. This time I'd divide out a common factor of 5. So 100 divided by 5 is 20. 35 divided by 5 is 7. So 7/20ths would be the simplest version of that fraction, but you can see they match up pretty easily here. Okay, again, 84.5%. So this one has a fraction of a percent here. Not a problem. We're going to just work in the opposite direction that we did up here. Instead of multiplying by 100, here we'll divide by 100. So this becomes 0.845. All right, and if you read just this number, that looks like 845 thousandths, right? If we read 0.845 by its place value, it's 845 thousandths. If you wanted to write it as this exact percent, convert it right to a fraction, then it would be 84.5 out of 100. Because again, we think of this percent as out of 100 as 84.5 out of 100. It would look like this. But we usually don't write the 0.5 piece here in our fraction, so it would look more like this. And again, we could do some simplifying of that fraction there. I'm a little out of room. I'm going to skip ahead here because I don't want this video to get too long here. I'm going to skip ahead here to this last one just to show you again how easy this would be. As a 2 out of 25, if I need to, this actually is a really nice denominator. It goes right to 100 by multiplying by 4, right? 25 times 4, so 2 times 4 is 8. So how do I write 8 hundredths? That's 0.08. 8 hundredths. Now I could again divide this out. I could type in my calculator 2 divided by 25 or 8 divided by 100. It's gonna come out as 0.08. So how many parts? Again, how many parts per 100 is it? Well, that's just 8. So this would be 8%. All right. And that is just some examples of converting from a fraction to a decimal to a percent, or from a decimal to a fraction to a percent, or from a percent to a decimal or a fraction. And again, we can model each one of those on a 10 by 10 grid. It's going to look the same. And those percentages we're going to find in our questions and our homework are really useful. Just like unit rates and proportions, they're going to be really useful in helping us make comparisons and predictions. So that's some notes on percent. I hope everyone has a great day.